Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda and today we're going to be chatting through all the books that I read in the month of September. So I read 11 books in the month of September, which is pretty good considering a good number of these are quite chunky. As per usual, we will be picking a prompt from my wrap-up prompt to see what we're going to be doing for this wrap-up, like how we're going to order things. So here we go. This is the one I grabbed. It says organized by book length, long to short. So that is how we will be doing this wrap-up. So let me reorganize these and then we will get into it. I just love Notion so much. I track all my books in Notion in a reading tracker, and I sorted it by the month and how many pages and put it from longest to shortest. That was so fast. It took me so long to realize, wait, I could just have Notion do all the hard work. Why am I trying to do all this? That was great. Anyways, let's get into the wrap-up. The longest book that I read in the month of September was 720 pages, and that book is Suns Will Rise by Jessica Brody and Joanne Rendell. This is the third and final book in the System Divine series. I really enjoyed the first two books when I read them, and it's taken me forever to read this one, and I really enjoyed this one. I really liked how everything wrapped up. It did feel a little bit slow at times, like I feel like this book was a little too long for what it was trying to do. But what I truly love about this series, not only is it the sci-fi elements, but every single book has a recap of the previous book, so you don't have to reread the whole series, which I very much appreciate, because as much as I like this series, I didn't want to have to go back and reread the series to read this one. But I love the recaps. They're perfect. They're exactly what I need, and as you're reading, it really starts to make sense too. It's like, oh yeah, I remember this now. So it took me a little bit to kind of get back into it, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I finally have finished this series, and I give this one 4 stars. I quite enjoyed it, and would definitely recommend this as like a good starting point to sci-fi if you are feeling intimidated by adult sci-fi. I feel like this is a good point to start with. It's a little complicated, but because it is YA, it kind of has a predictable plot line, so the plot is easy, and then you can just focus on understanding like the sciencey elements, which is really fun. Plus the audiobook is so good for this series, like so good. The next longest book was 704 pages, and that is Eldest by Christopher Paolini. This is the second book in the Aragon series. As I keep mentioning, I'm rereading this series in anticipation for Murtagh coming out in November, and this one took me so long to read, but I didn't love this one as much as I remember. I gave this one 3 stars. I liked it well enough, but it was so slow and boring. This book was so info dumpy. It just did not need to do that. I feel like Christopher Paolini could definitely have done a better job integrating with the information that he was trying to get across into the story itself, rather than having Aragon learning all these things, going to this school and going to all these different clans to learn about the world, and it just, oh, it was so boring. Like, this felt like a textbook for the world. Like, okay, here's everything you could possibly need to know, but I really like the ending. Like, I think the last, like, this much of the book was really good, but the rest of it was really boring. It was a lot of training montages, and, like, I usually love that kind of thing. I don't know why it didn't work for me in this, considering it is, like, with dragons, so you'd think I'd like it even more. I don't know. Maybe it was just at the time reading this, I was just feeling annoyed. I don't know, but I did like it well enough. I gave it 3 stars, and I'm hoping the next book will be better because the books just keep getting bigger and bigger, so hopefully they get better and better. Next up is a book that I thought I would not like at all. So this book is 664 pages, and that is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. This is the first of several standalone books that we are reading for Catch Up Book Club, and considering my track record with Joe Abercrombie at this point, I thought I was going to very much like this. I did not like the first Law trilogy, and I was like, man, I don't know, maybe this author isn't for me, but this book just ticked all my boxes. This was so good. I love this. I loved Monza. I loved the progression of the plot, it was so good. There's like a mystery, we were on a revenge plot. I'm like, I'm here for all of this. It was really enjoyable, and I just had the greatest time reading this. And I did listen to the audiobook while following along, which I don't like the audiobooks for this series, but I didn't mind it so much in this one. It was definitely more grating in the First Law trilogy for me than it was in this one, but I loved this. Like, this was so good, and I'm so happy as a standalone, but I really liked that it did play into the First Law trilogy. A couple characters from that were coming into this story and playing a role, and then I'm hoping characters that we met in this book will be showing back up in later books as well, because I loved like every character we met in here. They're all so complicated and morally gray, and I kind of hate all of them, but it's also really fun to read about them and follow along on their journey. So I'm really hoping that those characters show back up at a later date, but I truly enjoyed this one so much, which I was not expecting. So 4 stars to this. Let's just hope it keeps getting better with Joe Abercrombie, because I do want to keep up with Catch Up Book Club and not just like DNF the whole Joe Abercrombie universe. Like, I want to try. And this one's given me hope that I might like more. The next book we have is clocking it at 408 pages, and that is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I am obsessed with this book. I feel like I've been talking about this book a lot in some recent videos, but I am just obsessed. And as I keep saying in all those videos, I had previously read this book when it first came out a couple of years ago, like 2019, 2020, and I DNF'd it at like 20%. I didn't like it. I was really hating on this book, and I just didn't like it. But as I keep saying, I have really grown as a reader and realized what I disliked so strongly about this book is just kind of irrelevant. Like, it was just the whole thing. We had a growth moment, really. So I revisited this book in September because, you know, I'm like, you know what? The girlies love Grady Hendrix, and I really want to as well, because I love his covers. First of all, the premises of his books are so good, and I am just like obsessed with the ideas that he has. So I'm like, you know what, let's try reading this book again. And I was so pleasantly surprised, and I truly enjoyed this so much. It was just so good. I just adored it so much, and it was just so clever. It was addictive, and the audiobook was so well done. I believe Bonnie Turpin is the narrator. I adore her narration. So this was great, and this is one of the very few books I can say I gave 5 stars this year. Like, truly, this year has not been great for 5 stars, but I loved this. I would highly recommend this. It was so good. The next book we have is 402 pages, and that is Girls and Their Horses by Eliza Jane Brazier. So I read this for a very special vlog where I kind of revisited my pretentious horse girl era, in which I kind of reminisced on my time being in the horse world and my experience, and also reading this book. This is a brand new release by this author, and I was so excited to see someone finally writing like an adult thriller set in the horse world, because there is so much drama in the horse world. We really need to like talk about that. And yes, there is a lot of horse girl books out there, but they're mainly tailored for like little kids. So I've been waiting for someone to write like an adult thriller about the horse world, and this was great. It ticked all my boxes in terms of a thriller. It was so twisty and turny, and honestly, if you have no experience with horses, like you have no clue about anything in relation to horses, I still think you would really enjoy this. It's very digestible when it comes to the horse things. Like, the author makes it very easy to understand what's going on, and does provide some information about certain things. Like, if something is not like a commonly used word, like a saddle or a bridle, like people would know that. But if it's something a little more specific, she kind of explains that, but she doesn't make it super long explanation. It's just, yeah, that's what that means, going on, which I really appreciated. As someone who is familiar, it's like, okay, we don't need a huge explanation, but it was just perfect. Like, it was so twisty, and I was just not expecting any of the turns. Like, I had figured out, oh yeah, that's exactly what's gonna happen, and I was so wrong. There's also a big focus on mother-daughter relationships and the strain that mothers could put on their daughters by putting their dreams onto them, and just having a lot of pushing of what they want in their life onto their daughters and how the daughters feel about that, which I just thought was a really good exploration of that. And it was just so good. Like, I really enjoyed this. It was a good time. It's a really fast read. I mean, it's kind of a big chunker of a thriller, but it reads so incredibly fast, and I had a great time reading it. Next up at 400 pages, we have Immortal Follies by Alexis Hall. I read this book earlier in September. I think I read this during the Valdez trip, and I loved this so much. This felt like an adult fairy tale. It was so magical and whimsical. So the narrator of the story is like this little imp, and it's watching these humans and kind of making fun of them. And there's this main character who has fallen under some sort of curse. Every time she goes out into society to like mingle and find somebody to marry, something disastrous happens. So she goes to the locally known witch and is like, hey, could you please help me? I think I have a curse. And so the witch agrees to help her, and they go on this adventure to figure out what's going on, and that gets resolved kind of quickly in the story. And then there's another like plot line that kind of happens, which I thought was weird. So like that first plot line gets resolved in like the first like 50 to 60% of the book, and then the rest of the book just kind of felt like lost. So I feel like this book either needed to be shorter or split into two little novellas. I just don't think it needed to be one book for the way this book was structured. It just felt very clunky to me, but I still loved it. Like, the story and the writing was fantastic, but I just feel like the structure, how the story was put together, felt kind of weird. But it was still super good. I would still highly recommend. I loved this. It was so good. And honestly, the cover is like gorgeous. I mean, look at that. Next up, I read The Only One Left by Riley Sager, which comes in at 383 pages. I listened to this via audiobook from my library, and I quite enjoyed it. I kind of want to get into reading Riley Sager, although I've only read one other of his books and I did not like it, which was Home Before Dark. So I wasn't sure about this one, but my library didn't have too long of a wait on it. So I'm like, well, you know what? I'll just like place a hold. We'll see how it goes. So I listened to it and I really enjoyed it. So we follow our main character, who is like a licensed caregiver to the elderly, and so she works for this company taking care of elderly patients, and people suspect that she killed her mother because her mother died of a overdose on pills, like sleeping pills. So they think that she's the one who did it, like gave her the pills and like killed her. So she's obviously been denying that for years, but it's kind of putting her job on the line. So they offer her this like last job, basically like, hey, nobody wants to take care of this old lady who lives on the top of the hill because she is also suspected of like killing her family. So she's kind of ostracized as well. So our main character, agrees and goes to stay up there. And the house is like on this precarious cliff, and she agrees to stay there, and she starts to discover some very interesting things about the house and what actually happened to their family. So I really enjoyed it. Like, I was not expecting any of the twists and turns. Like, I am discovering I am terrible at discovering who the killer really is in these like thrillers that I've been reading recently. Like, I'll have it all figured out. Oh yeah, I am so right. Like, look at me go, and then I will be so far off the mark. It's like, oh, that was embarrassing. But that's like the fun of it, you know? I like guessing and then, you know, just being completely wrong. So this was great. I gave it 4 stars. Like, I truly enjoyed this one so much. I like this one better than Home Before Dark, which is the only other one I've read, but really enjoyed this. I love the dual narration of this story. It was so well done, and I would definitely recommend. It was a great time. Next up at 340 pages, we have Payback's a Witch by Lena Harper. I loved this so much. This is the perfect blend of witchiness, Halloweenness, with a really good, interesting plot and really well fleshed out characters. I love this. I think this is like one of the best romances I've read recently, where the romance and the plot actually have very equal stage time, I feel like. So we follow our main character, who's returning to her small town, which is like the only place that magic can really exist. Like, our main character left because she just didn't want to be part of magic anymore. She wanted to go live like a normal mundane life, have a job, all that. So she's coming back for this one specific ceremony that needs to happen every year, and she is kind of the one who has to like officiate this. So she's coming back and she can't really do magic anymore. She can like barely light a candle from across the room, and she kind of runs into some people that she used to hang out with and she knew from high school. And she runs into her ex, who apparently has been getting together with like her friend and several other people from high school. And these three girls who've been kind of cheated on by the same guy have decided to come together and seek revenge on this guy. And we also follow that, but we also follow the tournament that Emmy is officiating. Like, that's not really the right word I'm looking for, but you know, she's kind of like in charge of like the rules and like making sure people are following the rules. So it was so fun. I loved this. This was so much fun. Truly just like a fun fluffy read. I really enjoyed it. I read it so quickly. The characters were great. The atmosphere was amazing. I cannot wait to read book 2, which I will be reading in October. I just love this. I give it 4 stars. Would highly recommend. Next up, at 336 pages, we have Monstrilio, which I read for the Literally Dead book club. This was a wild time. I read this book in one sitting. I truly just could not put it down. So in this book, we follow our main character who, the very first scene, like the very first chapter of the book, we figure out that her son has died. He was very young and he only had a single lung. So the doctors didn't expect him to live very long anyway, but he lived for a decent amount of time before he eventually, his body just couldn't keep up and he passed away. And our main character is thinking of what she wants to keep from her son, because, you know, people would keep a strand of hair or something to remember her son by, and so she decides to take a chunk of his lung. And there's also some folklore or like stories going around that if you feed like a body part something, it will come to life and almost kind of become that person it was. So our main character starts feeding this lung and it starts turning into something, and the story just evolves from there. It definitely has quite a bit of body horror, so if you're not a fan of that, probably wouldn't recommend this one. But it was really good. It's a really good exploration of grief and what that does to somebody and how you come to terms with something like that, if ever. And it was just so good. Like, I just was addicted. I couldn't stop reading it, and it was just so hard to put down. And I don't have a rating on my spreadsheet, but I think I would give this book like a solid 4 stars. I very much enjoyed it. I really liked the narration of the book as well. I did listen to it and it was great. Would definitely recommend if you are a fan of like body horror. Next up, we have a book that comes in at 304 pages, and that is The Blonde Identity by Allie Carter. I read this for my in-person book club, and I gotta say, this wasn't that great, and pretty much nobody from book club really liked this book, which I thought was funny. So this is a very dramatic story in which we follow our main character who does not know who she is when she wakes up, and she just wakes up, guns are blazing everywhere. She's like, what is going on? This guy saves her and she finds out that she might be a spy, and we kind of go from there as she's trying to figure out who she is, and she's like falling for this guy, and there's like a whole thing. Apparently she has a twin named Alex and she doesn't know who she is though, and it's just a whole thing. It was just truly ridiculous. Like, this whole book was just so dumb. It was just like, yikes. I didn't like our main character. I really didn't like the love interest, and everything just kind of felt very cringy to me. Like, our main love interest would be like, hey lady, what are you doing? It's like, no, I don't like that. And there was a couple other things that now this book is so forgettable, I can't even remember. I just hated it. Oh, that's what it was. Our main character, who I forget her name. I think it was Sophie. She finds out her name is Sophie. Oh my gosh, she was so obsessed with language. Like, our main character would curse whatever. She's like, language. I'm like, you're a grown up. Like, who cares? I just thought that was so childish that she was so sensitive to him like saying something, and it's like, would you chill? Like, you're an adult. So that just, yeah, this book was kind of grating to me. It was just like, super annoying, but it was fine. I gave it 2 stars. I probably should sell this on Pango, but I'm honestly trying really hard to get to 1,000 books in my personal library collection so I can actually be considered like a library. So I'm not unhauling too many books right now because I really want to achieve that goal. I'm almost there. I'm like 75% there, so I want to keep going. But yeah, this wasn't great. And the final book that I read in the month of September, I also did not like. I actually quite hated this book, to be honest. And that is Something is Killing the Children, which is a comic. I read volume 1. This is 128 pages and I hated this. I did not like the art style. I didn't like the characters. I hated how graphic it was. And like I mentioned in the vlog in which I read this, I feel like seeing horror and reading horror are 2 different experiences, and this is definitely seeing it rather than reading it, and I just don't like that personally. It was gross. I didn't like it. It was nasty. Like, I've been reading a lot of horror recently and I've been loving it, but like seeing it, not a fan. So I don't know. I hated the storyline. It was just big no-no for me. So I gave it 2 stars, and I truly really wouldn't recommend it. Like, unless you don't mind a bunch of gore and a lot of really graphic images, they're kind of burned into my mind, honestly. I kind of wish I could bleach this book from memory, but it's fine, I guess. So I guess that's how we're going to be ending this video. So those are all 11 books that I read in the month of September. It was a pretty good month. You know, I found a 5-star read, which is so rare for me. I feel like I never find anything that's 5-star worthy anymore, but it was a pretty good reading month. I'm hoping October is even better, and so far it's starting off pretty strong. So that is going to be it for this video. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you all in another video soon. Goodbye!